This conference will now be recorded.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Fine. So the concept what we're going to talk about today is something that we all know, like something that we, all basically have been interacting with and all that stuff. So while, before starting the class, what I did is like I went ahead, I created a virtual machine, installed IIS on top of it. I did everything what we were doing earlier. And if I take this public IP right now, and if I say, okay, fine, give me a default.html, it will go ahead and let's say after some time it'll go ahead and let's say give me a page out there telling that you know what you have a default HTML page out here and all that stuff. Because I went ahead and installed something like IIS on top of it, and I basically did whatever we were doing. Like whatever we were doing, I went ahead and did that. But right now isn't loading. Just give me a second. Let's see. Networking.
And
I
one
don't.
one more thing I want to ask you.
Mhm, mhm.
I have tried so many times the IP address and default HTML, but
Okay.
it is not given. So
I mean,
what
where
is the
you?
problem behind that?
I mean, where you did you install IIS and then
Yes, yes,
install the
yes.
default
After
code
IAS
onto it?
only,
Mhm.
yes, yes.
And
After
did you
IAS only I
open a
tried.
Okay, and did you open a port called port 80? Like, did you
Port
open this port out?
80. Yes,
Because see,
it
what
will.
happened? Because the thing is that this is a web server, right? And it
Okay,
listens on a port called port 80 because this is an internet traffic that you're, diverting onto that particular web server. Now, right now, my web server is not listening because it's not giving anything to me because I did not enable a port called port 80 out here. So I'll have to go to my networking and I'll have to unblock a port here. I'll say
okay.
source any, that's fine, not a problem. I'll say it is a HTTP service. You might be getting something like this, right?
Yes, yes.
It's a HTTP service, and I'll say it's allow, and I will unblock this port. I'll say please go ahead and give me this port out, like give me this particular rule out here, so that I can go ahead and let's say unblock my server. And once I do it right, and after a couple of minutes, once I do it, if I do a default.html, I should be able to see a server basically that is coming out here. Like after a couple of minutes, this will generally take a bit of time. So after a couple of minutes, it's still loading from my cache. After a couple of minutes, it should be able to go ahead and give me this particular page out here. It should at least give me a page basically telling me that okay, fine, you have your web server installed and all that stuff. Now see if yeah, I'm getting this called something, this is the server and all that stuff. So you'll have to have the IIS installed. You'll have to have all the basics basically that are that are getting installed out there, and then you'll have to unblock these ports out. That's the logic.
Okay, okay. I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay,
Run
fine,
the
not a
ICS
problem.
script also, right?
Yes,
So
I
that
did
will.
run the script. That's correct. So, I mean, for example, I have this particular virtual machine out here. So I'll just say run, take this out, and I'll take our script basically that, basically we used. Take this again, put it in here, and say run.
I did this.
This is
I did
how,
this.
yeah, you did this, right? So after doing this,
Yes.
make sure that your port 80 is unblocked, like I have.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Otherwise, your web server will not listen to you on port 80 and it will not accept traffic from the internet. So you might not get the page. So if you unblock it, that's when you'll go ahead and get the page out there.
Okay. I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, not a problem. Fine. So we did this, right? We did it like a couple of times and we said, okay, fine. This is the IP address and this is the IP address that we are going to give it to the client. So that this is a working website. Now, let's imagine that there is a code, there's an actual code, working code, and this is what the customer can see and etc. But do you think that someone will be interested every time to go ahead and say, you know what, 20.110.124.239 and all that stuff? Will anyone be interested in typing this out? No, right? I mean, I myself am not typing it out. I'm taking it out from, let's say, the overview page. I'm not. I don't want to remember this out. I don't want to keep this in my memory. I'm just taking this out, putting it here, and just doing a default.html and getting a page out here. Meaning, This is not a friendly name. This is not really a friendly name, and that's the reason we need to bind it with something called as a domain. We need to bind this IP with something known as a friendly name or a domain name. Even before binding this, okay, even if before I go ahead and bind this out, there is a concept called DNS, domain name system. This is a lot used, meaning this is a very widely used concept, and there are a lot of basically technicalities associated with it, which we'll be discussing today. Meaning, let's forget about our website for a second, and let's say I go to a website called irctc.co.in. I say enter. It was able to load this page. Meaning, at the end of the day, this particular domain, right? I mean, this particular domain, which is irctc.co.in, should get a result to an IP address. What do I mean by that? Meaning, let's imagine that irctc.co.in is being hosted from an IIS machine, meaning in an Azure, let's say in Azure, Government of India has, let's say, taken a virtual machine. They put their code on top of it, exposed port 80, given a public IP, and given and associated a particular domain to this particular public IP out there. Meaning, if I am able to look at this particular website, my computer is able to resolve it to an IP. Meaning, for example, if I do in PowerShell, if I do go ahead into my computer and say resolve hyphen DNS name, let's say name irctc.co.in. Do you all see this? This or these are the set of IPs from where irctc.co.in is being hosted. If I probably do this, I'll say okay, fine. I'll say proceed basically. It will still give me the page without, let's say, unsecure and all. It still gives me a basic page out here telling that hey, you know what, you can basically go ahead and log into it. Meaning my computer is able to resolve this IP, and it's telling, you know what, the type is an A. It's an A record IP basically that I'm giving out to you. Meaning this is what I am trying to do right now. I have my computer. My computer has a NIC card, and that has an IP to it, something like 183.132. Something something. And when I type in IRCTC over the internet, it's able to divert me, or it's able to take me to an IIS server in our case, or to a virtual machine, which is listening on, let's say, an IP address something like this: 103.252.142.25, which is a public IP address that they have exposed. But how does this really occur? Like what happens in the backend? Now in the backend, what happens is that when I type in irctc.co.in, I am on the internet searching through a record book. Meaning I am searching for a mapping which something like irctc.co.in is equal to this particular IP. I am searching for these record sets exactly on the internet. I am searching for a record something like this. Now, if I do, let's say IRCTC, if I do, let's say something like irctx.co.in or .co.om, something like this, it is not able to search for this particular website because this particular website doesn't exist on the internet, and it doesn't say, you know what, DNS name does not exist. Meaning, as in when I give this request to my browser goes through and looks for a record set. And all these records, right, they need to be hosted somewhere. They need to be hosted or they need to be handled by someone. That someone in my case are called as name servers or name record servers. These name record servers will have tons and tons of records of different websites, and they would just give me, let's say, telling that, hey, you know what, this is the name of it and this is the IP of it. Meaning, when I give a request to the internet will go to a name server or to a lot of name servers and search for a record or search for a record that is or search for a name record that is hosting a website called irctc.co.in, and it will be able to resolve or it will have something called as a name record out here, something like this. It will say, oh hey, you know what, I have this IP. Now I can divert my browser to that particular website or to that particular IIS box which is hosting my particular website. This is what exactly goes in the backend. This is what exactly happens basically in behind the scenes. Telling that, okay, fine, it will search through a lot of records and then it will give me a website. Now, why am I telling the entire thing? Because if I want to make my website public, this is a public IP basically, and I'm directly hitting my public IP and I'm able to see an IIS page out here coming up. But if other people want to, let's say, visit to my website by using something called www, I need to implement the same strategy, right? I need to make sure that my records are published onto something known as a name record service, and these are published over the internet. And very importantly, I have something called or I buy something called as a domain name, because without a domain name I cannot go ahead and, let's say, publish my records and all that stuff. Now, I had an account in a very popular hosting website called GoDaddy, where I went ahead and bought a domain out, and it is there in my products called, like, I have my domain out here which is called myazuretraining.xyz. Just give me a second. Just give me a second. Let me stop sharing my screen for one quick second so that I can sign into it. Okay, let's come back. So back again. I have something known as myazuretraining.xyz, which is a domain basically I went ahead and bought out. And as in when I go into this particular domain, now this is called a domain registrar, guys. My domain registrar is something like a GoDaddy. It's an external website. And what I want to do is, like, I want to take this particular or I want to use this particular website called myazuretraining.xyz and integrate it to my website that I have just created. So I'll say manage domain out here, and I'll have, let's say, an entire domain records out here telling that, hey, you know what, you can manage this domain and all that stuff. Just come down and say manage DNS, manage the domain name system out here. And this is how the record set will actually look like. It says your domains and all that stuff, and it will give me an entire register for it. It will give me a complete register for it telling that, hey, you know what, you can manage your particular DNS out here. Come on. And it's going to give me a record set that I can manage. And here I have tons and tons of, let's say, record entries already, like, predefined for me, which is given by GoDaddy to me. And all I can do is I can say declare records, and I can declare two types of records out here: A name record, C name record. A name meaning actual name, and actual name should always and always be an IP address. CNAME is also known as canonical name record. Canonical is nothing but an alias. Like you all have an alias name, right? Like at your home, they can call you something, but on your certificate, it can be something. Meaning, if someone even calls with a canonical name, meaning something like www.myazuretraining.xyz, please divert him back to the actual name record. This is how I am giving my record entries out here. So what I'll do is like all these are like by default provided by the hosting pro. I mean the domain register, which is GoDaddy in my case. What I can do here is that I can say okay fine. The only thing I'm interested to change is the A record, because my A record right now is pointing to something like 20, 110, 124, 239, and here it is a different one. So I'll just say edit, change, and save. Okay. Okay, there is some issue basically with this particular website out here. Let me refresh this out once again. And let me try doing this out. Let me see. Expires on 2024, which is like good. Let me manage my DNS again. Let me delete this for example. I'll just say delete. Okay, delete this. Okay, so processing request. Let me try again. Okay, delete this out, delete this out. Okay. Let me try deleting it out again. Let me see. Delete. Okay, there seems to be some issue, let's say, with that particular domain register out there, but that's fine. What you're going to do out here now after you have a domain with you is that you're just going to come here. You're just going to change the name record set out here and just take this particular IP address and just throw it in. Like on any normal day, it should normally work, but there seems to be some issues out here telling that what, there is some issue and all that stuff. Not sure what that is, but it's just throwing an error telling that what, you'll have to contact the domain register, please contact the support and all that stuff. So in short, it's not allowing me to go ahead and let's say change my name records out here. So it's just throwing an error telling that, hey, you know what, I am not sure, or there is some error basically that is going in the backend. But if I were able to, let's say, go ahead and create an A record set out here and save it out here without any issues, as and when you type in my Azure training.xyz out there, you should be able to divert, or it should be able to go ahead and resolve it to this particular IP. But how will it able to resolve? Like I've also said that what, your records need to be published over the internet or over something known as a name server. Here the name record servers are given to me by GoDaddy. It says, you know what, these are your default naming servers that I am giving it to you, which is ns21.domaincontrol.com, or in other term, they're also known as domain controllers, which handle your entire domain. Since this is not working, I'm not able to show an actual demo, but let me try after a couple of minutes, and if it works, we can also go for a demo tomorrow, not a problem. But there seems to be some issues with this today, so really cannot help in that. But as in when you publish and save, right, the first thing GoDaddy is going to do is that GoDaddy is going to take all these servers out here. It's going to say, hey, you know what, I have a new name record set. This is an A record pointing out to 20 something.239, and whenever someone types my Azure training.xyz, please go ahead and divert them to a machine which has this particular address, and that's how you will be able to see the IIs that is hosted on this particular machine out here. This is how you will be able to go ahead and, let's say, publish your records out there on the internet. Guys, any questions with this? Any questions that I can take with this?
So whatever the public IP given in this GoDaddy, can we use that for virtual machine?
No, you cannot use it. That is something that you cannot do. Like, you cannot do a reverse engineering out there, because public IPs are dynamic in nature, and they are like given out by Azure according to the availability. So this was a public IP basically that I have created a long time ago. Like, the last record that I created was on 2.9, but for some reason this is not getting deleted today. Let me try deleting the CNAME, and let me try doing this out. There's some issue basically with this particular domain provider out. So this was a record basically that I created a couple of while ago. So this is something that was there when I created. I mean, this was the IP basically of the virtual machine when I was creating this record. So this is how I did it. Now you just have to change this record. That's the only thing that you have to do.
Okay.
So you cannot.
How much this? Mhm.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
How much they will charge for if I want to test it for one?
Now this particular domain, right? So this is like for 1 year or something that I purchased, and this was purchased for somewhere around 129 rupees or something. So I bought it for 129 rupees, but if there is a sale, you can also get it for 99 or something like that.
Okay.
Okay, so what if I don't want GoDaddy to manage my name servers, because this is something, or manage my record set, because this is something like an external provider, and as you guys have seen today, like, we are not able to do a lot of things out here because the website is down, or there is some issue with the website. It's not letting me delete and all that stuff. So there is some issue with, let's say, the website and all that stuff, and this can happen to anyone, right? This can happen at any given point in time. So what if I don't want GoDaddy to manage my records? What if I want Azure to manage it? Do I have any option like that? Certainly yes. I have an option called DNS zone. I can create a public DNS zone in Azure, and I can point my records, or I can basically tell Azure that, you know what, GoDaddy is not the domain manager for me right now. GoDaddy is just the domain provider. You are my domain manager. Like, instead of publishing my records out there on GoDaddy, please go ahead and you manage my entire records. I can say, okay, fine, create a, in a default resource group, and DNS zones are not regional specific, so they are like global. And I can now say it's now asking for a name. Can I give any random name out here? I cannot give a random name. The name of this particular DNS zone should be the name of the website basically that I want to host my records on. It should be the name of the domain basically, or what I want to manage this one out. So I'll say, okay, fine, give the name of the domain out here. This will be the name of the DNS zone, and I'll say review and create. So very simple procedure. I said, okay, fine, this is how my website really looks like, or this is the name of my website, and so will be the name of my zone. It's a very simple creation, will not take more than a minute or two. It'll go ahead and, let's say, create me something known as a zone, and this is called a DNS public zone, guys. So instead of a domain provider having me manage all these things, I am having something known as a DNS zone out here which manages all my records. I'm saying, okay, fine, this is my DNS zone. I'll manage all my records, and I have a virtual machine out there. And now I'll introduce something known as a DNS zone out here. I'll introduce something known as a DNS zone which will handle all my records. Now this is how my zone really looks like. It says okay, fine, it's my Azure training.xyz, and I'll say add a record set. It should be an A record set basically, and I'll say it's a www record, and now I'll say it's an A record set. I can also go for a CA, it's a CNAME record and all that stuff. But for now, it's an A record set, and this should result to an IP address. So I'll pick up the IP of the virtual machine that I was working on. And I can add this IP out here. And I can say OK. And this will now create me a record set. It says, you know what? I have an A record set out here, which is www.myazuretraining.xyz, just pointing out to something called 20 dot something something something. And all the name servers, right, will be handled by Azure. These are all the names. Sorry, these are all the name servers what Azure kind of gives me. So can I now go ahead and let's say use this particular record set out? Can I now basically try using this out? Not likely. Records would have been, wouldn't have been published. And if I try to even resolve this out, I might not get the DNS out. Don't need this, don't need this. Okay, so it's able to answer. It's able to give me an answer telling that, hey, you know what? I have already published the records, and it still throws me an error. I'll let you all know what is the reason behind that particular error out here. But let's say if I do my Azure training.xyz, right, my records are my records got published over the internet. My records basically got published over the internet by these particular name servers out here that Azure is kind of giving me. But still, when my Azure training.xyz, when you hit that particular website, it will first go to the domain register. The request will first go to the domain register because domain register basically traditionally they work in that way. When you hit a website, it will first go to the domain register. It will see who are the naming servers. Here, these are the naming servers. It says, you know what, I'm using the default name servers out here. And these name servers do not have the records basically that I have. So what I need to do is I need to say that, hey, you know what, I don't want to use your name servers. I have my own, which I am basically managing, which basically Azure is managing. So I'll say enter my own name servers, and now I can pick up my name record servers from Azure and put it here. So this is my way of telling GoDaddy that, you know what, Azure is now my hosting domain, or Azure is now my domain provider, or Azure is now my domain manager, and Azure is hosting all my name records. Azure is hosting everything basically, so you don't have to worry about it. I will take care of it my own self. I can say save, and if it allows me to do it, it'll go ahead and save all these records out. It says yes, I can go ahead and give a consent out. Yeah. After a couple of minutes, it'll say, you know what, features may take some time and all that stuff. After a couple of refreshes and all that stuff, it'll say, you know what, we are not someone who's like hosting your records. Now it says, all these things out here. But after, giving a couple of refreshes and all that stuff, it will say, you know what, we aren't managing your domain. Like your name servers aren't managed by us. So your records aren't managed by us. Azure is something like these are the DNS servers who are actually managing your records. And now probably if you go ahead and let's say my Azure training.xyz, after a couple of while, like it'll take somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes in order for your records to get propagated. After a couple of while, it should be able to go ahead and divert me to, let's say, the IIS page that I do have. Let me try to do it in an incognito window. After a couple of while, it will certainly go ahead and let's say display my website out here. But right now, the records doesn't seem to have propagated. So it will take some time, like after like about 5 or 10 minutes. If you try this out, it will go ahead and display, let's say, the IIS page of it. So what am I doing out here is that I am essentially telling that, hey, you know what? My name record server is not this particular guy. This particular guy doesn't manage my domain name. I don't want GoDaddy to manage my domain name. Rather, I want Azure to manage my entire record set. And these are the servers in Azure, which will now act as a name record servers. And it will now go ahead and give me a possibility to go ahead and basically host my records out there on the internet. How is this different from, let's say, going and hosting it on, let's say, GoDaddy? Like just you've seen, right? The website was down and I wasn't able to change my names. I wasn't able to do anything as such. Now, when you look for Azure, or when you basically go for a name, like let's say a DNS zone in Azure, Azure is going to give you name record servers. Like these are nothing but IIS boxes basically, and or these are nothing but like Windows servers or any servers as such, which is hosting all that names. And these four would have been in four different regions. So if any region is down, your name record set will still be available in three different regions, and you will be able to browse to your website. You will be able to basically browse to your website in any given day. Like it takes some time, like it for your records to get propagated and all, it takes some time. Usually not so much, but I'm just suspecting there's some issue with, let's say, GoDaddy website as such. But normally when I do this, automatically you would be getting something like an IIS page out there. But this is the general procedure on how do you go ahead and proceed with, let's say, the DNS zone in Azure, and this is called as a public DNS zone, because what I'm doing out here is that I am making sure to publish these websites so that everyone on the internet can actually use it. So this is known as a public zone, let's say, in Azure. Guys, any questions with this? Like it's a very simple resource creation. Went ahead and I just did a very simple resource creation out there. So any questions with this, guys?
Is there any limitation for the public domain name zones creation?
No, there isn't.
And also for each and every zone they will charge, right?
Yeah, they will charge. Like you will have a charge basically, because all the services are charged, guys. Like whatever you use in the cloud, it's charged. So each and every zone is chargeable out there.
Can we buy the SSL certificate and bind it to this website
You
from
can
the
certainly
Azure
do it.
portal?
I mean, from the Azure portal, yes, you can certainly go ahead and buy the SSL certificate. But SSLs, I wouldn't suggest. It's pretty costly out there. Like you'll have to pay somewhere around 700 or 800 per month for the SSL, basically for the binding. I wouldn't suggest that. But when you look at a PaaS service, you have something called as an Azure Managed Certificate, and I'll cover the SSL binding there. Since it's a very costly resource, I'm not covering it right now.
Okay.
But as such, you can go ahead and
For IRCT,
yeah, go ahead, please.
no, no, please go ahead, finish it so that I'll ask other.
No, I was just telling that the SSL is like costly here. So that's the only thing I was telling you. You can go ahead.
Okay, for IRCT, we saw that four DNS A records. So we can
Mhm.
also create four, right? Public IPs.
Yeah, you can create four public IPs. Like for example, for IRCTC, in all likely, these might have been, let's say, the public IPs of the load balancers or something like that. They might have been exposed in that way. So you can also create like multiple record sets for the same thing, and any one would be fetched when you go ahead and hit this, right? When you go ahead and hit this particular record, any one record will be kind of fetched out there.
We are giving the name server names, right? But why it was giving like error record?
Sorry, which one? I didn't get you.
We're giving the name servers, right? In the
Mhm.
GoDaddy, but
Mhm.
why it was giving error like that? Yeah, we can't
It's
display.
because the website itself is completely down today. Like the first request will actually go to DN. I mean, the first request when I hit this particular my Azure training.xyz will actually go to the domain provider, and the domain provider will divert that particular request to, let's say, the name service. But in this case today, not sure why, but the domain register itself is completely down. like the entire website is itself down when we did it earlier, right? It was not allowing me to change and all that stuff. And even when it's allowing me to change this out, it's not able to recognize that these are my naming servers. So this is something that I would suspect that the website being down. If it wasn't down, or if there was an error in what we were doing, if you do a resolve DNS name, right, it will not give you, it might not have given you this particular address out here. Meaning your records are getting published on the internet. Your records are still there on the internet. Like even if you go ahead, let's say to a tool like DNS lookup or something like that, and if you try to resolve this particular name, it should basically give you an A record. It should be able to, basically go ahead and give you an A record out here. So the issue is not with the binding that we basically did it. So see, it says, what, it's A record managed by Microsoft Corporation and all that stuff. So the issue is not with us. The issue is basically with GoDaddy. So they are not able to, let's say, go ahead and let's say divert our request to the name servers. So there is some issue with the website today. So that's the reason you're able to see this particular error out. So the first request always will, kind of go to the domain provider, and the domain provider will go ahead and take that request to and forward it to the name servers basically. But in my case, the name forwarding or the request forwarding to my name servers that I've given here is not happening because the website is itself down today and all that stuff.
Okay.
But in general, if the website wasn't down and all that stuff, you could go ahead and let's say, as in when you hit this particular website, you should be able to see the IIS page that is coming up. Okay. Now, this is a public zone record. Now, meaning, is there a private zone then? Like if there's a public zone that I'm talking about, then is there a private zone? Of course, yes, there's a private DNS zone as well. Then why do you want to use a private DNS zone? A private DNS zone is used for intranet communications. Is used for something known as an intranet communications, where you put in something called as a private DNS servers out here, guys. Meaning, let's say you are using an office application, meaning your own office, like your own internal office out here, and you have many servers that is hosting your application. Many servers that are hosting your applications out here, but you want your employees to basically log into the website using a friendly name, like let's say www.time.com or timesheet.com, which is an application for filling up your regular office times and all that stuff, right? You want to use such kind of names, meaning you want to have such a kind of name resolutions. So you will be using something known as a private DNS zone in this case. Now, how do you use it? How do we basically take that out? Let's see. Firstly, let me go ahead and delete this out since we do not need this anymore. Let's go ahead and delete this out and say, okay, fine. And for the greater good of it, let me say change the name record servers to, let's say, GoDaddy. Let's say GoDaddy name server. Let's say save. Let's say yes. Go ahead. Okay, great. So this is deleted. And what I'll do right now is I'll say, okay, fine. Go to a DNS zone and I'll say DNS again. Here I have something known as DNS zone, which is public. And now I'll say go for a private DNS zone. Say create a DNS zone out here. I'll say the RG is something like DNS RG. And now it's asking me for a name, guys. Okay. Now I can say it is timesheet.com. Now, did I purchase this domain? No. Then how can I basically give this particular name out here? Or let me be more specific and say timesheetazure.com. Then how do I really, or how do I basically, if I haven't purchased anything, how do I really go ahead and give this name? Now, for a private DNS, that's the biggest advantage. You do not have to purchase a domain out there. This is your internal domain. This is, let's say, the internal domain basically that you will be using. So whatever name you give here, even if you give a google.com or something like that, it will still work. I am giving something called as a timesheet azure.com. I'll say next. I'll say review and create. So very simple creation. It is just saying what is the name that you want to give. I'll say a friendly name like timesheet.azure.com. Now see what happens. Now I'll say, okay, fine, I've registered this particular domain out here. Now I want to register my servers, meaning now I want to add my servers into it. Now I have two different servers out here, VM1 and VM2 out here, both having IIS on top of it, and one being in East US and one being in West US, and one doesn't have a public IP at all. Like one doesn't have a public IP address at all. Two different regions out here, and let's see how we can integrate all our concepts right now. So I am creating a private DNS record out here, and once the private DNS zone is created, I will go ahead and add this private DNS zones, or I'll rather go ahead and add the servers to my private DNS zone so that my internal resolution can happen fine. Meaning I have virtual machines like this, VM1 and VM2, and both of the virtual machines, let's say, is hosting something called as a time application. Now you have your own users out here, your internal users who want to basically use something called timesheet.azure.com and get diverted to either one of the websites. Because it's easy, right? Friendly names are actually easy to go ahead and work with. So how can they work, or how can they basically integrate this out? So I'll go into my private DNS zone, and my private DNS zone name is called timesheetazure.com. I'll say virtual network links. I'll say add a link. I'll say this is like VM1 link, and I'll say the virtual network that I want to actually use is something like DNS RG and something like this, which is in East US 2. I'll say enable auto registration. I'll say okay. And as and when this link is created, now this is going to take like about 2 or 3 minutes of time for this link to be created. As and when this link is created, you will see a record popping up out here. Okay, let's see how it looks like. So let's give it a minute, and let's go ahead and create this link out, and let's see how it looks like. So what am I doing now is that I have internal servers out here which are over private IP addresses, one sitting in the East US, one sitting in the West US, and I have a name resolution out here, something like a DNS zone. So let's say DNS, and I am including this particular resource so that it can resolve my names. I am hosting my records and I'm saying, okay, fine, adding a private link to it so that it can, now if your private link basically is ready, you'll be able to see something here, like say it says in progress. So I am adding my virtual networks here, and I'm saying, hey, you know what? This is the first virtual network that I do have. And I said, okay, fine, this is the private link that I have. And now if you see the record, right, it would have created a record called VM1 A record, and this is the IP address, which is the internal IP address of my virtual machine 1. Now if I go ahead and say, okay, fine, I'll add another link, which is VM2 link that is sitting in the other virtual network like this one, which is in West US, and say enable auto registration. I'll say add. Now what's going to happen, it's going to create another link to add the second server inside the DNS zone. So I am pulling both the servers inside the DNS zone, and once I pull it, let's see how it kind of looks like. So while this is happening, I'll go ahead and log into one of the servers, like since VM1 has a public IP to it. And let's also extend the concept and say we have a point to site integration right now, and I'm able to basically over the VPN connect to this particular virtual machine. So I'm inside the network right now, right? But since point to site kind of takes time, I did not want to go ahead and do that right now. So I exposed the public IP to it, and I'm doing an RDP into this machine without a point to site. But in general, when you're using your office applications, right, you will connect to your office application, or you will connect to one of the servers using the VPN, meaning that has a point to site enabled. And once this is in, we can go into the server and we can try basically hitting the friendly name of the server too. So we'll try basically going ahead and interacting with a website called timesheetazure.com. So this is also done. The second link is also created. So if you see this right now, if you see my particular link out here, there are two records out. One for VM1, second one for VM2. Both listening on an A record or both having an A record that is pointing out to a private IP out here, which is 10.2.0.4 and 10.3.0.4. Now, one last thing that I need to do out here is that the virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2 guys are sitting on two different virtual networks. These are two different virtual networks. And if I need to establish a communication with them, I need to do what? I need to do a VNet to VNet peering. This is the last thing that I need to do out here. So I'll just say come to my virtual network, the first virtual network out here. Go into the peering and add a peering to it and add a peering to my virtual network too. So I'll say VM1 to VM2, allow good. Let's say VM2 to VM1. Let's say DNS.rg. Okay, sorry. DNS.rg, which is great. Add, and I'm just adding a peering right now. And the peering is done. After a couple of minutes, this peering status should change from updating to get connected. And after that, we'll see what happens basically inside the VM1. So I am inside the VM1 and I want to basically listen or I want to basically interact with VM2 not over its private IP but with its friendly name that got published in my private DNS records. That got published in my private DNS zone, and my private DNS zone right now is called timesheetazure.com. And let me see how I'll interact with this. So let me, yeah, this is connected. Now I'll go to my server. I'll disable, this is the VM1 guys, okay? I'll say disable, I'll go to the local servers and I'll say disable the internet enhanced, like the enhanced protection out here so that I can interact with the, the server over the Internet Explorer. Yes, this is off. Great. Let me go to the Internet Explorer. Just ask me later. Now, what was the name zone guys that I basically had? It is timesheet.azure.com, right? And I want to basically talk to my virtual machine 2 using this particular friendly name. I'll say it is vm-2.timesheet.azure.com. And now when I enter, my DNS zone basically, my private DNS zone was able to identify that, I have a record set that is pointing out to the private IP. And can this server listen to the private IP of the VM2? Yes, because it has a VNet to VNet peering. And if I do a default.html out here, this is VM2. This was only possible, like if you take this out on the internet, it will not give you no matter what. vm2.timesheet.azure.com doesn't exist. Even the records does not exist. Even these record set doesn't exist over the internet. DNS name does not exist. And why am I able to see it inside my network is because this is a private DNS zone. This is only for me in my organization. I put a private DNS zone for my organization and I made sure that this private DNS zone gets published or these records gets published within the virtual network space. Meaning only if you are coming within this particular virtual network out here will you be able to go ahead and interact with these servers in that frame. This is how you will basically configure DNS name records and all that stuff. Guys, any questions with this?
Yeah, in the DNS zones,
Mm-hmm.
we created a virtual link, right? Virtual network
Mm-hmm.
link.
Mm-hmm.
So suppose I created a new VM on the existing virtual network link. So
Mm-hmm.
the name automatically will be assigned, or we need to create any record, a record kind of thing.
No, it will automatically be assigned because you have enabled something called as an auto registration. So if you create a new machine there, it will automatically be registered with this particular uh, private DNS zone. The records will be automatically published. You do not have to, go ahead and manually publish it out.
Okay, great.
Okay, any more questions, guys, with this?
First, we should create the virtual networks and then virtual machines, like VM1, VM2,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
or we
virtual
can
network.
directly connect. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, first we should create the virtual networks and virtual machines, or we can directly create the virtual machines only.
You can directly create
In
the
the
virtual machines also. Like there is no hard and fast rule that you'll have to create a virtual network first and then a virtual machine. Like the
okay.
virtual machine wizard itself will go ahead and create a virtual
Yes.
network for you.
Yeah.
So there is no hard and fast rule for that. You can go ahead and do that. But the main thing is that like my virtual networks are on two different address spaces in two different regions. So I did a VNet to VNet peering so that both of them can communicate with each other. And I established something called as a virtual network link so that both of them can communicate over a friendly name called timesheet.azure.com, like timesheet.azure.com, something like that. Okay.
If I want to create a alias name, I mean CNAME, so
Mhm.
can we create it from here?
So here it is not advisable to go ahead and create a CNAME because here what you're doing is that it is your private DNS zone, right? And you're doing a direct A name records out here. You can go ahead and create a CNAME record set out, but it's not that advisable to go ahead because the use case scenario is very less. Like when you do a CNAME record, you'll have to give an alias name to it, something like xyz.com, which is pointing out to again this particular website. Like very rare use case scenario where you'll go ahead and do a CNAME record out here, but you can basically go ahead and also create a CNAME.
Okay.
Like you can do an alias name also with this. Like this is just like any other record set which supports a lot of aliases, AAA records, and all those stuff. It's just the use case scenario what you're trying to implement out here, and this is completely private. Now, one last thing is that this is a managed service. This is a managed service, meaning this is completely managed by Azure, or I will say this is a platform managed service, guys. Meaning, if this is down for some reason, your entire applications internally will be down. Right? That's how it generally goes. But it isn't down as such. Like there is a very good SLA what Microsoft offers with this. It is generally not down. But there are a few organizations which says, hey, you know what? Why should Azure manage it? Why can't I manage it? Why can't I go ahead and let's say manage everything like this? Can I do it? Of course, yes. The DNS basically, the private DNS is a concept which is nothing but a virtual machine in the backend which is installed with a role called DNS server, and it is just given it to you packaged with the entire thing. If this is a service, right? This is a PaaS service, a platform as a service out here. Meaning Microsoft is spinning up a virtual machine in the backend. They are installing something known as a DNS role out there, publishing records, and giving it to you as, hey, you know what, you can directly use it. You do not have to actually go ahead and log into a virtual machine and do all that stuff. I can directly provide it to you. But the issue is that this is a virtual machine in the backend, right? What if this goes down? Your entire DNS zone will kind of go down, right? So then what is the SLA guarantee what Microsoft gives me? Why can't I go ahead and let's say create my own service? You can definitely do that. Instead of using a DNS, a private DNS zone or a platform managed service, you can directly use a virtual machine as a DNS server. Till now, what we were doing, we were using virtual machines as a web servers, right? I can also go ahead and register my virtual machines as DNS servers out here. How can I do that? I already have a virtual machine out here. It's like my VM1. I'll go into my server manager. I'll say add roles and features. I'll say next. Installation type is role based. Next. Server selection assist. Next. Server roles is not a web server right now, but this is a DNS server. So till now what we did is we went ahead and let's say we added a role called web server IIS. Now I still have a web server role out here, on top of which I'm also giving it a role called DNS server. I'll say okay, great, this is a DNS server. I'll say okay, fine, go ahead and install this out. A very simple procedure to convert a server or to convert an IIS machine or to convert let's say a virtual machine into a DNS server out here. So all I'm doing is adding a role to it. So this is what infrastructure as a service gives me a freedom to do. Platform as a service doesn't give that freedom, but platform as a service is very friendly to use. Like when we go into the platform as a service concept, right? You'll see how easy it is to basically go ahead and, for me as a DevOps engineer, it is very easy for me to go ahead and interact with these services. I don't want the headache or don't want, let's say, the headache of managing all these things out. I don't want to do all these things out. If you don't want to do all these things out, you can go ahead and use a platform managed service or a platform as a service like let's say a DNS zone out here. Let me for let's say for ease delete this zone out here. Does it allow me to delete? I'm not pretty sure about that. See, yeah, it's failed because there are virtual network links which I need to firstly delete, and let's say delete this out and this one also. And once this is deleted, I can go ahead and delete my zone also. So while my zone is getting deleted, what I did is like I went ahead and installed something like a DNS server out here. And I can go ahead into the tools and I can say where is my DNS server? Yes, the DNS. And now it says okay, fine, this VM is a DNS role. Now what do you want to do? I'll go here and I'll say forward lookup zone, new zone. This is my primary zone and this is timesheet azure.com. Yes, I want to create a new file. I'll say don't allow dynamic updates for now. I'll say finish. Now I have just created a zone. Whatever I have like done using a PaaS service, whatever PaaS service is doing for me, I'm doing this manually right now. And once inside the zone, I'll say add a new host record. And I will say the name is something like vm-1. So it is vm-1.timesheet.azure.com. The IP address of it would be the IP address of my VM1. So I have like both two virtual machines out here, and this will be the internal IP address of my VM1 out here. 10.2.0.4. Add this IP, add the host. I'll say okay. Now I'll also do a VM-2 and I can take the IP address of my VM2 out here. I'll say add the host. So I am creating my own zone right now. I am creating my own record set. I am adding my own record set rather than Azure having to add it. I am saying okay, fine, this is how I want to add it because this is my internal zones. I mean, this is my private DNS and I want to do it using the infrastructure as a service model and not a platform as a service model. And finally, what I'll do is firstly, I'll go ahead and delete my private DNS zone so that it doesn't conflict with me. So let me go ahead and delete this out. .com and let me delete this out. And as soon as this is deleted, what I did right now, guys, again, is that I made this particular server. I made this particular server as a DNS server out here. But does my virtual network know that this is the DNS server it needs to use? Not really. For which I'll go into the virtual network where the VM1 is there. So I'm just going into the virtual network out here. And in the virtual network, the DNS servers here by default are managed by Microsoft. So all your name resolution, etc., is managed by Microsoft. Now I don't want Microsoft to manage it. I want my own self to manage it. I'll say custom, and I'll say this is my custom DNS server, which is VM1. I'll take the private IP of my VM1 and I'll put it as a DNS server right now. It says virtual machine within the virtual network must be restarted to utilize the DNS name settings. So let's go ahead and restart both the machines, like VM1 and VM2. And once restarted, I can again go ahead and let's say look into these machines. So let's allow a minute or two for the machines to be restarted. Like these are restarted right now and they're successfully running. So let me take the private public IP of it, or the virtual machine one. And let me log into this particular machine. And what was my record? It was time.vm2 or something like this. The records needs to be propagated. Like sometimes it might take some time because it's a custom DNS that you're trying to do. But let's say, yeah, it's still there is like there would be some time basically where you need to again go ahead and restart services and all that stuff. But after you publish the record out here, this is how it'll go ahead and let's say display your page. Like it'll go ahead and let's say give you a page out here. Sometimes what happens is that you need to stop your machines and then you need to restart them out so that you can use this particular services out. Because I just did an infrastructure stop, I'll say okay fine, yeah I know that I need to console, okay fine. So I basically went ahead and restarted the services from the infrastructure. Sometimes you'll have to go ahead and log out from the machines, deallocate them again basically. See, now it went ahead and it kind of shut down its own self. So sometimes it is a bit hard and fast out there. So sometimes you'll have to do a hard restart and all that stuff. And once that's done, you can start using the DNS record service out there. So I still did not do a hard restart. I just did a reset from the portal out there. Let me refresh. But this is in general how do you convert your virtual machines into something known as a DNS service. And what I did is that I made sure that my virtual network knows that this is my DNS server. How did I do that? I came here into my virtual network. I went into the DNS server and I'm not using the default which is Azure provided. By default, Azure gives you a DNS, like all the name resolution is taken care by Azure. But if you don't want to do this, you can go ahead and go for your own custom service. Now, what is the advantage of it? Is that you can add not one but multiple service. You cannot do, I mean, now you are like pretty much assured that what, you have multiple servers out here running from different regions which have your name records, which have, let's say, the records basically. And all these servers are going ahead and helping you out to resolve your internal names. This especially is true for, let's say, very big organizations which has a lot of internal applications, and there are also internal projects what employees work on, right, on the VPN and all that stuff. Even for that you need applications and etc. Even for them you need these services that are running in the backend. So all likely your company might have been using, let's say, if your company is not a public company, like let's say they don't want to expose themselves to the public, let's say they are completely private, applications are completely private there, they might be using something like a private DNS zone or a custom DNS server, what we did just now. So what all we covered today is, like we said initially, like we were relying upon a manager, like a domain provider like GoDaddy, and we changed the domain provider from GoDaddy and we came into, let's say, Azure, and we used a public DNS zone. And then we said, what if I want something that is private? We went ahead and established something known as a private DNS zone, which is like the very easiest concept out there. Just go ahead and enable auto registration, provide a virtual network link, and your servers will be able to talk to each other, provided there's a virtual network peering to each other if they are sitting in two different networks. And then we said, okay, fine, we don't need something which is so simple. We need to complicate this a bit, because I am of course concerned about the availability and all that stuff, and I do not want to rely upon something like a platform managed service. I'll go for a service which I manage my own self, which I take care of my own self. So I went ahead and converted one of the servers that I had in my virtual in my entire network into something called as a DNS server. And I went ahead and established something known as a DNS zone and created something known as records. So I went ahead and did all that stuff. This is the complete concept of DNS, guys. This is how you manage DNS and all that stuff. Any questions here? Guys, any questions? Did anyone not understand the concept? Like, is there any disconnect there?
No, it's clear to me.
Okay. Anything else, guys? Anyone else? Okay, so with this, we come to an end to the IaaS services, like everything related to IaaS, like on the whole, I would say 90% of the IaaS. Like there's still something called firewall and everything, basically, which we'll cover along with PaaS and all. But 90% of the IaaS, basically, or most of the questions what people ask from IaaS is like completed. What we're gonna do from tomorrow is that we'll for tomorrow's class especially, we'll go ahead and we'll see how do you create an ARM template for especially a service like a virtual machine, and how do you do a custom script extension for a service like a virtual machine, and how do you basically play around with ARM templates or PowerShell scripting. And after that, from day after, we are going to start with the Azure PaaS services, and PaaS services like Azure Web Apps, Azure Keywords, Azure SQL databases, and all that stuff. And then ARM templates and PowerShell scripting along with that. So that's going to take somewhere around a week, like 1 week of time for the entire PaaS, for me to complete it. And once that's done, we can move into Azure DevOps. So this is going to be the roadmap on how we are heading on things, right? Does anyone have any questions, anything on that, guys?
Yeah, one quick question. Here in the VM overview console, we are seeing DNS name not configured. What is that?
This is the DNS name label. No, this is the DNS name label. So this can be a friendly name out here, something like test001 or something like that. This will point out to test001.east.cloudapp.azure.com. Like this is something that we did when we were uh, doing a deployment on the virtual machine. So we said we need a DNS name label and the name should be static. So this is nothing but a friendly name that you'll just give, or a DNS name label that you'll just give out here. But it is not that easier to use. Like it will be a dot cloud app dot Azure cloud, something like that. So this is the DNS name label basically that you need to. Meaning if you want to configure it, you can go ahead and say, for me, if I say if it's a test 20000 something like this, and save this out.
Can we say this as alias name?
Yes, this is an alias name, which will directly point out to, let's say, your internal IP. I mean your public IP addresses out here. So instead of calling, let's say, my entire public IP, I can call my DNS name out here. I can take this DNS name, I can put it here. I can call this out here. So even this will actually divert me to the default.html page.
Okay, great. The same way for the RDP also.
For RDP, I am not really sure if you can do it on, let's say, a DNS name. I am not 100% sure that you can do it. Yeah, you can do it. So yeah, you can go ahead and use the RDP out there. Just give the same. At the end of the day, it'll again come back to, let's say, the server out here. Yeah, VM1. It's like again coming back to VM1. So yeah, you can use this for RDP also.
Okay, great.
Guys, any further questions before I close the session today? Let me close this out. Anything else, guys? So please practice these concepts, guys. Like these are like very very core concepts of DNS and all this stuff. So please try it out. If you don't have a domain, I wouldn't recommend you to go ahead and buy a domain for just this demo. Like you just have to have an idea on how the names are configured in the backend. But if you still want to go ahead and let's say practice this out, I would suggest not to go ahead and buy a domain, but just go ahead and try doing a private DNS zone. It's the same thing, right? Like it's the same thing, but it will just won't get hosted on the internet. You can just go ahead, use the free private DNS zone out there, and you can configure your name set out there same way you do it with the public DNS zone, and you can try it internally with your virtual machines and etc. within the same virtual network or a different virtual network as per se. And you can also try out the concept like converting a virtual machine or a server into let's say a DNS server. Like until now we were doing a web server. Now you're gonna add another role and convert it into let's say a DNS server out there. So this is how you can play around with this concept. So any quick questions before I close the session for today, guys? Akila, you had something, right? Did you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, last concept was much confused, still confused. Last one.
The point to site or the this one? Sorry, which one?
Point to
Which last
site,
concept?
last one.
Oh yeah, point to site. Yes. There. I'm pretty okay with you having a bit of confusion with point to site because that's a bit complex concept, I would say. So just try to look at the video, a couple of more times. And if you still have a question, I am okay to go ahead and take a class again on point to site.
Okay.
Okay, guys, with that, then we can close the session today, and we can meet tomorrow at the same time, and we will discuss on the ARM templates and how to create the virtual machine, and what are all the challenges that you'll kind of face while creating the ARM templates and all that stuff. So with that, have a great day ahead, guys, and we'll meet tomorrow. Yeah, Chandra.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm saying thank you. Bye.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Bye. Thank you.